We as humans are curious creatures, and while the fear of the unknown is in our nature, so is our fascination regarding it. The love for the morbid and the macabre originates from this fear, as it's something that eludes most of us in our lives. For as long as human civilization has existed, the concepts of demons, monsters, and evil spirits has existed as well. Tales regarding these frightening beings have been woven from ancient stories into modern-day TV shows. It's therefore no surprise that this has seeped into the anime and manga culture as well. One of the most popular genres in this regard is the dark fantasy genre, which combines fantasy and horror tropes, delivering the best of both worlds to the audience. There have been many seminal works in the manga and anime medium in this genre over the years, including Norihiro Yagi's acclaimed manga/anime, Claymore. Set in a dystopic medieval world, it follows the story of a band of female warriors who have been genetically altered to fight against monsters called the Yoma. As the story develops, we discover a world where the line between monsters and men gets extremely blurred. The series deals with complex themes of love, hate, mental health, and what it means to be a human. One of the primary motifs in the story is that of the twin goddesses of love, Claire and Teresa, and the numerous women who represent an aspect of them. In today's video, we'll be doing a deep dive into the characters of Rafaela and Luciela and how they are the false representation of the twin goddesses. We will delve into their origins, powers, personalities, and how throughout the story they are set up as a foil for Claire and Teresa, who are the actual representation of their namesake goddesses. Our video today will contain a lot of material that has been left out of the anime, so you need not fear spoilers if you only watched the animated adaptation of the series. So, without further ado, let's dive right into the dark and gritty world of Claymore and hope that we come out the other side with our guts still intact. Origins of Luciela and Rafaela. Luciela and Rafaela's earliest days are steeped in mystery, as not much is known about them. However, it's not difficult to piece together their past, considering the fact that all Claymores are united through a common bond of trauma caused by Yoma. We can assume that just like their compatriots, their family and loved ones were murdered by the Yoma, after which they were taken in by the organization and trained to be warriors. While this is most likely the course of things as they played out, there is one other possibility. Just like Alicia and Beth, who would follow in their footsteps years later, the two sisters might have been sold by their own family to the organization, as this wasn't exactly uncommon at that time. We know that the Claymore project was a work in progress for the organization, and they were continuously experimenting with these young women to create the perfect subservient killing machines that they could control. Warriors like Claire, the male Claymores, Alicia and Beth, the unnamed twins, and Clarice and Miata are all examples of the organization's repeated attempts at making their perfect warrior. One of their earliest attempts towards this end was the soul link technique, which they would perfect towards the end of the series. When one considers how harsh the training for becoming a Claymore is, we can only imagine the hell these two sisters must have been put through, as they were the first pair of warriors that the organization would experiment on with the soul link technique. From what we gather, the two struggled with this technique as they weren't twins, along with the organization's understanding of this dangerous technique still being in its infant stage. Luciela would rise up the ranks alongside her sister and become the #1 warrior of her generation, with her sister taking the #2 spot. The sisters shared a close relationship and were literally inseparable, partly due to their bond with each other, but mainly because of the soul link technique. However, one day, while performing the move, Rafaela would not be able to maintain control over her sister's yoki, causing Luciela to awaken permanently. When any other numbered warrior awakens, what we usually get is an awakened being, one who can only be solo killed by extremely high-ranked warriors. This event is already considered a disaster by the organization. However, when a rank 1 warrior awakens, it's nothing short of a calamity. Due to the preposterous amount of yoki that they possess, the 2 times in history up to Luciela's time when a rank 1 warrior had awakened, it gave rise to what the organization called abyssal beings. This was because their powers ran as deep as an abyss, as they possessed unfathomable power and yoki. Before the organization was destroyed by the Claymore uprising led by Miria, it had only come close to annihilation once before. This was when Luciela had awakened into the 3rd ever abyssal being after Rafaela had failed to control her yoki and bring her back. The organization's headquarters was devastated, with almost all the warriors getting killed by Luciela, along with more than half of the trainees as well. Rafaela herself loses an eye in this carnage, before Luciela leaves the carnage and moves to the south of the island to make it her own domain, establishing the 3-way deadlock between Islay in the north and Riefel of the west. Rafaela, on the other hand, is blamed for the incident and is stripped of her rank and symbol. She is told to live as if she were a dead person, and to this end, Rafaela suppresses her yoki to make herself undetectable and leaves the organization. After Priscilla's awakening, she's brought back into the organization with a much lower rank in exchange for information regarding her sister Luciela. Recognizing this might be her only chance at redemption, she accepts. Rafaela is the oldest serving Claymore by Claire's time. The story of these two sisters is not done any justice in the anime, with Luciela not even making an appearance while Rafaela only makes a brief one. None of their rich background and lore is explored, so we thought it was only right that we do so here in this video. What is a soul link? We just spoke a lot about the soul link technique, and while many of our more veteran Claymore fans might be familiar with it, we feel it's necessary for us to explain it in a much more in-depth manner for the benefit of our viewers who have just found out about this wonderful anime and manga. To understand the basic principles behind soul link, we must first understand that once a warrior fully awakens, they can never go back to the way they used to be. The change is permanent and irreversible, which is unlike the partial awakening that Claire and the Ghosts of the North seem to have undergone at some point in their history. While it is true that the organization views the awakening of a warrior to be an absolute disaster, we know that they only feel this way because they cannot control an awakened being. The fact that they resort to experiments like the one we're discussing right now proves this point. An awakened being is several times more powerful than the warrior they were while still human, so it only makes sense for the organization to want to control such power. The answer that they came up with was the soul link technique, but it required two individuals syncing up body, mind, and soul for it to work. It entailed entrusting one's mind and soul to your partner and awakening while they shoulder the strain of the process and safeguarding their human soul so that they could do the impossible and revert back to being human. The natural choice for this experiment were Claymores, who were blood-related sisters. The chances of having a powerful enough set of siblings as warriors were extremely slim, hence when Luciela and Rafaela both rose to the rank of number 1 and 2 respectively, the organization decided to finally set their plan into motion. Unfortunately for them, Rafaela, as we mentioned earlier, failed at her task, causing Luciela's awakening, which almost destroyed the organization. However, this calamitous failure would not be enough to deter the organization, and they would attempt to implement this technique once more with some minor tweaks. For their second known attempt, they would make use of twins, hoping that their connection would be deeper, allowing for much better control. They would be proven correct, as Alicia and Beth, the new number 1 and 2 ranked warriors, would succeed, whereas Rafaela and Luciela failed to successfully implement the soul link technique, making Alicia the first Claymore to fully awaken without losing their humanity. We later found out that having warriors who could awaken and come back at will was simply the first stage for the organization regarding this project. What they next strived to achieve was absolute obedience, as having someone with this ability turn on the organization would mark this entire venture as suicidal. They had good reason to do this as well, considering the laundry list of Claymores that had either gone rogue or been extremely hard to manage over the years. To this end, they once again replicated Alicia and Beth's experiment with a pair of unnamed twins. However, in this case, they leaned in heavily regarding the propaganda and brainwashing bit to ensure that they would never even dream of turning against their creators. Unfortunately for the organization, these new twins would be amongst the first to rally behind Miria's Claymore rebellion, finally bringing freedom to these young girls and destroying the organization in the process. This soul link is once again utilized by Clarice and Miata in their battle to defend the holy city of Rabona from the attack of Uranus, powerful awakened being, and finally, in the ultimate battle with Priscilla, when Claire uses it to sync up with Teresa in order to finally slay their mortal enemy. This is an important technique as it plays an integral role in promoting the motif of the twin goddesses throughout the series. While Claire and Teresa are the namesakes and the ultimate representation of these goddesses, there are several women that foreshadow and represent these divine twins throughout the course of the series. Personality and goals. We don't know much about the personalities of the two sisters prior to the disaster that befell them, as that part of their history has now been lost forever. What we can derive is that considering their power levels and how that usually correlates to a warrior's hatred towards the Yoma, their loathing of these creatures must indeed have been great for them to rise to the number 1 and 2 ranks. Once a creature awakens, while they retain some semblance of their personality, they are irrevocably changed on a much deeper level. Luciela appears to have an air of childish distinct playfulness about her, even as an abyssal one. She's extremely territorial, mocking Isley's need to function in a group. Luciela, however, seems to still harbor positive feelings towards Rafaela, although she has been somewhat twisted. When she encounters her sister during her final hour after being defeated by Isley, Luciela encourages Rafaela to awaken so that they can take down Isley with their combined might. It makes us question whether her love for her sister only extended so far as to help her reclaim her lost territory and defeat Isley, or if it was something more. This is the sort of writing by Norihiro Yagi that allows users to create their own answers, making everybody's read-through the manga unique. Luciela also has a hint of arrogance about her, constantly taunting Isley about his mannerisms and taste during their battle. He's also extremely cunning, having been the first one to break the rules of battle by secretly using her awakened powers. Rafaela is a warrior who, prior to being dishonorably discharged from the organization, seems to have been one of their most faithful soldiers. She bore immense guilt for not just failing to save her sister's soul, but also the deaths of her fellow warriors and the young trainees. At some point in time after this, she resolved to finally save her sister by ending her life. While she might initially come across as a proper soldier of the organization who obeys every command given to her, we find out at the end of the series that during her confrontation with Irene, instead of killing the former number 2, she had actually spared her life. Luciela, despite having turned into an abyssal one, still harbors love for her sister and doesn't seem to blame her for causing her awakening. The love that the two sisters harbor for each other is a painfully twisted version of the pure love that the actual twin goddesses of love represent. Born as sisters, the two fail to become one of mind and soul as fate leads them through diverging paths, only for them to meld together as one in a twist of fate to become a unified entity whose only goal and motivation is the destruction of all life. What does Luciela look like? Luciela has the appearance of a young woman who is in her 20s. This is because Claymores stop aging after a certain point, and this trait of theirs seems to carry on even after they awaken. She's the taller of the two sisters and stands at 5 feet 8 inches tall. No matter what the situation, Luciela wears a calm and almost disdainful look on her face, as she had never really faced the possibility of defeat before, both during her time as a warrior and an abyssal being. She has fairly long hair that she ties into pigtails. Her preferred choice of outfit seems to be a long, low shoulder dress, which adds to her beautiful, slightly unkempt and wild appearance. As an abyssal being, Luciela develops prominent feline features, with her face looking like that of a demonic cat with sharp bladed protrusions emerging from the sides of her face in her awakened form. These bladed growths also develop across her back, serving as weapons and armor against her foes. Her arms and legs both transform into claws with the same blade-like growths extending from her elbows and running across her thighs. One of the stark differences between the transformation of her fellow abyssal ones and many of the awakened beings is that her awakened form doesn't have biomechanical characteristics. One other important part regarding Luciela's transformation is the fact that she has 2 deadly tails that have a series of mouths running across them. These are also her primary weapons when she's fighting in her semi-awakened form. Her transformation really invokes her wild energy as it transforms her into a feral feline being. While not the most impressive transformation out of the 3 original abyssal beings, it certainly is an interesting design choice. What does Rafaela look like? Unlike her sister, we get a pretty detailed look at Rafaela's appearance. The former number 2 warrior wears the standard issue Claymore uniform of her generation. This includes a triple-layered pauldron on each shoulder, a fault to protect her waist, vambraces on her arms, and a pair of sabatons to guard her feet. Her hair is platinum blonde due to the loss of pigmentation caused by the surgery that transforms these young girls into claymores, which also results in her having almost deathly pale skin. While we know that even non-defensive warriors are able to regenerate lost body parts, including eyes, as seen when Roxanne regenerates one of her eyes that she destroyed herself after Nadine's death, Rafaela chooses to remain blind in the eye that was destroyed during her sister's awakening after she failed to control it. The reason she chooses to do so is because it's meant to serve as a constant reminder to herself regarding her failure to save her sister and the countless claymores and trainees who lost their lives that day. While it might look like her left eye is scarred, it's actually an artistic depiction of blindness. From what we have seen in terms of successful Soul Link candidates awakening, both sisters seem to have a very similar awakened form. It's therefore very much possible that Rafaela's awakened form would have mirrored Luciela's. There is also the possibility that this would not be the case, as they are not twins like the others, which could absolutely play a factor in this regard. However, Rafaela never awakened during her lifetime, at least not as a single individual, therefore this is something that we will never know. The fact that Rafaela returns later in the series as the number 5 warrior, making her the oldest serving Claymore at the time, her appearance, particularly that of her eye, makes her look like the grizzled veteran that she is. The stylistic decision of not giving her an eye patch further accentuates her character design, which spills over to her personality and status. Powers and attributes. In this section, we're going to be discussing the combined powers and attributes of both Luciela and Rafaela under the assumption they share many of their abilities. As demonstrated by other warriors who have been trained to perform the Soul Link technique, since it required them to be one of mind and soul, they often mirrored each other's abilities. While Luciela and Rafaela might have failed experiments, we're sure that thanks to their training, this is true for them as well. It's interesting to write about their powers and abilities because we get to infer both their abilities in normal human and awakened form just by looking at the other, as we have no idea what Luciela's normal abilities were like because she's never shown to us as a warrior. We have to look at her sister, while in Rafaela's case, we don't know what her solo awakened abilities are like as well, but we can get a fair idea by examining Luciela. In a sense, to get the complete picture regarding the two, we have to examine both of them as they are two halves of the same picture. This might be a completely intentional move by the author and further plays into the motif of the twin goddesses. Immense Yoki reserves of Luciela and Rafaela. As expected of warriors who were ranked as the two strongest of their generation, their Yoki reserves were simply off the charts. The most obvious sign of this is Luciela's transformation into only the third abyssal to ever exist. Considering their ranks and the fact that Rafaela is explicitly stated to be just as powerful as Luciela, we can safely assume that she too had enormous amounts of Yoki within her. The organization actually feared that the trauma and guilt of losing her sister might wake Rafaela as well, creating a fourth abyssal being. When she gets reinstated as the number 5 ranked warrior in the organization, it's clearly a red herring as she is clearly far more powerful than that. When the two sisters merge together and awaken in the end with their combined Yoki reserves, they are easily able to dwarf the powers of even the abyssal ones and properly challenge Priscilla, who until that point had been an undisputed entity. We can therefore safely say that Rafaela and Luciela undoubtedly possessed immense Yoki reserves. Yoki's sensory shield. When Claire battles Rafaela within the dormant consciousness of the Destroyer, we learn that Rafaela has a very unique fighting style. While most warriors concentrated on creating a unique sword style, Rafaela had created a fighting style that was much more defense-oriented. She would manipulate her Yoki to form a shield around herself, which would allow her to detect the faintest movement that occurred within that area. This meant that she essentially had no blind spots in combat, and it also made it virtually impossible for anyone to sneak up on her. Thanks to her ability to detect the movements as soon as they touched her Yoki field, she could react with speed and precision, which gave her opponents the impression that she had precognitive abilities. As the two sisters were trained to be of one body, mind, and soul despite failed experiments, we are certain that Luciela was able to use this technique as well. In the end, Rafaela hands this technique over to Claire before her consciousness dissolves. All-devouring mouths. We spoke earlier about how Luciela had mouths that lined up across her two tails that were capable of devouring anything and everything. Their powers were so devastating that in conjunction with the rest of her abilities, she had the ability to destroy and alter the entire landscape around her. While they were terrifying enough on her tail, we soon find out that she can manifest these mouths anywhere on her body. Thanks to this, Luciela is able to devour any attacks that are made on her, as seen when she eats all the arrows that Isley shoots at her. As most of their fight happens off-screen, we're not sure how Isley was able to defeat her. From what we can gather, considering that she had no physical injuries upon her, along with the fact that she simply ran out of Yoki to maintain her awakened form, we believe that Isley simply overwhelmed her to the point her abilities couldn't keep pace anymore. This was only possible thanks to him being an abyssal one as well. The devouring mouths are straight out of some Lovecraftian novel, and it's one of the most unique abilities in all of anime and manga. Expert swordsmanship. One doesn't just receive the top 2 ranks within the organization simply on the strength of their Yoki reserves. As a Claymore's primary weapon in combat is their giant sword, it's imperative that they become experts at handling it. While each warrior is a proficient swordmaster, the upper echelon of their order are usually in a class of their own. This means that both Rafaela and Luciela were easily some of the best swordsmen to have ever existed in the Claymore universe. It would have been interesting if we could have gotten a battle between Irene with her sword arm still intact and Rafaela, just to see how much the latter measures up in terms of her swordsmanship against someone who is widely considered to have one of the strongest sword techniques in the entire verse. Enhanced physical attributes. While there are some claymores who lean heavily into enhancing a particular physical attribute like strength or speed, as in the case of Sophia and Noelle, we must not forget that all claymores are physically enhanced thanks to their hybrid nature. Therefore, even warriors like Luciela and Rafaela, who do not focus on enhancing their physical attributes, are incredibly strong, fast, and durable. In fact, the likes of Rafaela and Luciela, who were both strong enough to be the top 2 ranked warriors, might be faster and stronger than some of the ranked warriors who specialize in enhancing their physical attributes. As such, it's not a stretch to say that the 2 sisters had incredible physical prowess. The birth of the Destroyer. When Rafaela finally encounters her estranged sister as the latter flees, weakened and defeated after her battle with Isley, she's asked by Luciela to awaken and join her in conquering the rest of the island for themselves. However, seeing her sister in her human form sweeps Rafaela with an intense amount of regret and sorrow as she asks Luciela for forgiveness for failing to prevent her from awakening. Luciela, however, doesn't seem to care much about it and urges her to awaken so they can defeat Isley and begin their campaign of conquest. Rafaela simply hugs Luciela, who thinks that her sister is simply hugging her as they hadn't seen each other in years, and hugs her back. However, Rafaela proceeds to break Luciela's back in an attempt to end her life, but while doing so, instinctively pours her yoki into her as well in order to save her. When they are found by Riefel, the 2 claymores have merged with each other in an eternal embrace and lie dormant. Riefel, who wants to find a being that can challenge Priscilla, attempts to awaken them and manages to stir their consciousness by using the abilities of a captured claymore called Renee. They are, however, fully awakened after they encounter Claire, following which they transform into a giant being that looked like a twisted take on the form of the twin goddesses of love. This solidified their status as false goddesses, as all this new entity sought to do was devour everything in its path, regardless of nature and allegiance. It was driven by a single emotion to destroy everything, a trait which we would not necessarily associate with a being whose form looks like that of the goddesses of love. Powers of the Destroyer. The Destroyer was able to fire parasitic rods several miles, which could take over the body of the host that they impaled, transforming them into weaker versions of Luciela's awakened form. These rods could easily overwrite the genetic makeup of their host and change them irrevocably, making them a part of the Destroyer's hive mind. They, however, had limited yoki, and after it ran out, they would simply perish. However, if someone with yoki on par with or stronger than the Destroyers were to come into contact with the rods, its powers were rendered null and void, as seen when Priscilla saves Rocky after he gets impaled by one of them. The Destroyer also possesses incredible durability and yoki reserves, as it is a creature made out of the combined powers of 2 warriors who were capable of awakening into abyssal beings. After it combines with what seems to be the remnants of Riefel and Dauf, it definitely becomes stronger than Priscilla in her awakened form. According to Priscilla, the Destroyer neither desired meat nor territory, as it was despair incarnate that had been unleashed into the world. False Goddess of Love. There have been several pairs of warriors throughout the series that have represented the motif of the twin goddesses. Rafaela and Luciela, who are bonded by love for each other due to them being siblings, come closest in doing so after Claire and Teresa. The dichotomy of their love that seeks to preserve and destroy each other at the same time leads to it not having the same purity as the one displayed by Claire and Teresa. For a being to be divine, the aspect that they represent has to be pure, as purity is often associated with divinity. However, their love is filled with selfish needs and a desire to destroy. This makes them unfit for the mantle of the twin goddesses of love. Even though their combined form takes the shape of the goddesses, instead of spreading love, they are touted as the harbingers of despair by the main villain of the series itself. Delving further into this nature etymologically, Rafaela is the feminine form of Raphael, which is the name of an angel, and Luciela, which roughly translates to light in French, is a play on the word Lucifer, who is again another angel, albeit a fallen one. In biblical theology, there is a clear hierarchy between God and the angels, which Norihiro Yagi tries to loosely play on here. Rafaela and Luciela, just like their angelic counterparts, can never take the place of a god. Thus, despite them assuming the form of Teresa and Claire, the twin goddesses of love, they will be nothing more than false pretenders. Marvelous verdict! While there are many sad and tragic characters within this world created by Norihiro Yagi, few tales are as heartbreaking as the one of Rafaela and Luciela. Most claymores face the tragedy of losing their loved ones only a single time before their transformation into warriors, but in Luciela and Rafaela's case, it happens to them twice when they lose each other following the former awakening. While they might not be the real representations of the twin goddesses of love, and we have dubbed them as pretenders, their love, no matter how tainted and imperfect perfect was love, and that can't be denied. It's a shame that the anime hardly explores these two complex characters and their relationship, as it would have undoubtedly made the show more popular as a whole. We cover Claymore and all of your favorite animes and mangas in detail on our channel, so be sure to check those out if this video managed to pique your interest. For now though, we have to bid you farewell as our time together has come to a close. Thanks for sticking with us right to the end of this one. We hope to see you soon on the next one, but until then, stay safe and stay marvelous.